moderation. In your speech, you delved into the concept of the Han as a master race and its potential connection to Xi Jinping's widely promoted concept of a common destiny for all mankind. Do you believe China's intention is to realize this vision solely within its colonial territories, or is it an overarching goal for the entire world? If the latter, two-part question. Okay. Perfect. So if you believe that the latter is true, it could pose a significant threat for the global security, potentially leading to resistance and the formation of containment strategies against China by other powers, which might not be in the best interest of the Chinese people. So, last question is, are there any Chinese academics in China responding with any counter-arguments or reactions to this perspective fully supportive?
Okay, so 3 parts to this. One is it about the whole world or just about the former colonies? Second one is there any resistance? And third, is there anybody inside China that has an alternative interpretation? I think the traditional Chinese cosmology is of the emperor being the ruler of all under heaven, Tianxia, and that all other political authorities are not legitimate. In other words, only the emperor has the mandate of heaven to be the political authority for the entire world. And so China recognized that there are other peoples, living far away from the imperial capital who, are still under the authority of the emperor, but are too uncivilized for the Chinese emperor to send officials to rule them. They heard of people from Holland who have red hair and a lot of hair on their bodies, and they smell because they eat the estrogens from a cow, that they leave to form bacteria. In other words, they eat cheese. So the emperor doesn't send officials to those uncivilized Europeans, but they are expected to respect the authority of the emperor as the sole son of heaven. So, there are no legitimate other governments in terms of China's traditional cosmology, and I would argue that Xi Jinping also sees himself as in the succession of the emperors, and that China should be the dominant power on the planet, and that all of us should be subordinate to China's greatness, and ultimately the Han civilizational norms and culture will dominate the entire planet if Mr. Xi gets his way. And he's talking about this community of the common destiny of mankind happening by 2050. That probably won't happen that fast, but that's the idea. So second question, any resistance? Yes, we're resisting. We formed the Quad, the India, Australia, U.S. alliance in the Indo-Pacific, and the AUS-UK-US alliance, which doesn't include Canada in Indo-Pacific, even though my looking at the map is Canada's an Indo-Pacific country and UK is not. And NATO is now becoming quite active in Indo-Pacific, and a lot of our countries are engaging in freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea and Taiwan Straits, and trying to prevent North Korea, which is really China's only genuine proxy, from bucking the UN sanctions. So there is resistance, I think increasing resistance, and resistance within countries like Canada, where we want to have foreign influence transparency scheme acts to know who in our societies are receiving benefits from a foreign power, and we want to have other legislation that will allow us to effectively try and prevent China from, taking our dual-use military technologies, such as Jeffrey talked about and Tony talked about, and other means to try and come to terms with China's overall covert and agenda to corrupt our systems. In terms of domestically in China, I think that there are enlightened elements within the People's Republic of China who don't accept the idea that Xi Jinping is the inheritor of the emperor tradition and that the Chinese Communist Party is Confucianism for the contemporary era. And those people would look at other aspects of Chinese tradition, such as Taoism, which would suggest more power from below, to more spontaneous, less top-led, authority-driven tradition. So I think that there are people in China who feel that the Chinese government's policies are bad for the country. They don't support the increasing alienation from the West and the United States. A lot of people in China admire the United States, and they don't believe in a war over Taiwan. And I think that there are elements within China, maybe they're not visible to you, who don't believe that the Chinese government's policies in the Uyghur regions and in the Tibetan regions are the correct policies and actually have respect for the civilizational traditions of non-Han peoples. So, that element does exist. But, due to the limitations of the spread of information and control of the internet and censorship, a lot of Chinese people are still supporting the government's discourse because they don't know any better. But I do think that nothing lasts forever. Xi Jinping will eventually fall from power, either through a military coup or through the will of God that he should die. And we could see better days ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burton. Are there any questions from the audience for Dr. Burton?
Hi, Dr. Burton. I would like to ask, as a newcomer, I have been in Canada for 2 months from East Turkistan. But before the Chinese government took away all our Uyghurs' passports and prohibited us from going abroad, but now some students are going abroad, some parents can also go abroad to see their children. We all know this is their conspiracy. In my opinion, this is only temporary, so I want to ask why they suddenly let us go abroad now. It is because of international pressure, or are they planning something? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that you've come to Canada. I look forward to you joining me as a Canadian citizen in the time ahead. I don't know about this Uyghurs going abroad, but maybe they decide which ones are the ones they want to send abroad. And so, the camps, I think, can be successful in brainwashing Uyghurs to teach them to abandon all of their religious and cultural values and become hollow people who just, support the Han mainstream. But maybe you know the details of this better than me.
Okay. I think that China is not release the entire population. They released some of them from the camps, and as I said today, those people were critically ill and they were not managed to live as a normal person in normal life because they harmed in the camp physically and mentally. So, but outside of the camp in East Turkestan is like an open prison before, but now we got so much pressure from the international world to China. China would like to hide its genocide and make the showcase, want to release some people, then they want to show to the world that look, they traveling, they free, we're not doing any genocide. So they want to cheat the world again. So we don't believe that, but they just let some people go and tell the world that they are free. And these people, that does not mean that all of them are designated or are working for the China, but some of them working for the China, but some of them doesn't know. They surprised too. Some people say, why they give me passport? Why they let me know? And they surprised too. And some people may be working for China. We don't know in the short term right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Turdush and Dr. Burton. If there are no more questions, I would like to move on to Mrs. Turdush.
There's a question here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this one's for Dr. Charles Burton. And how can democracies address the challenge of economic interdependence with autocratic nations like China while safeguarding their own democratic values and national security interests?
I mean, I think that this is something that we're looking at carefully. It's, you know, as Tony was saying, there's enormous pressure from business to allow continued free trade and investment with China. But particularly in Canada, we're looking at things like the Chinese Communist Party's monopoly on critical minerals, you know, that they could use for economic coercion against us over political matters in the future. And of course, I think morally, we don't want to support companies that are manufacturing cameras and computer programs that are used to further repress the freedom of people in East Turkestan. So, you know, we have some restrictions on that. But I think in general, we do have to be looking at supply chains much more seriously. And even if there are economic costs, then that we have to put security first in terms of decisions about how dependent we become on Chinese products. There is a major concern right now in the auto sector over Chinese electronic vehicles. You know, China has produced a very sophisticated battery technology, and their vehicles, because they're produced with subsidized labor, could be very competitive in Canada. But the thing about those vehicles, aside from devastating our economy by destroying our auto sector, is they would be full of spyware that would allow the Chinese regime to, you know, engage in a similar kind of comprehensive artificial intelligence monitoring of all of us that they're doing already to the Uyghurs. So, you know, these are serious matters. The problem really is that it's hard for me to get the ear of Canadian people to take this seriously, and money talks, and China has a lot of money to talk to Canadian citizens in general, and particularly through forms of bribery to our political leaders, particularly the idea that if you don't criticize China or engage in measures that go against China's expansionary interests in Canada while you're in a position of public trust as a politician or civil servant, that after you leave public service, you'll have opportunities in law firms and boards of companies that have connections with China. But if you're identified as someone who speaks out against China, those opportunities will not be open to you. So I think there are a lot of politicians who are subtly conditioned by China to you know, not support the kind of measures that you're talking about, is how to protect our democracy from China's economic coercion.
Thank you. Let us move on to Mrs. Turdush. In your speech, you emphasized that the region has been left with no other alternatives than independence to ensure its survival of its nation for East Turkestanian people. However, this should be determined by the East Turkestanian people's national will. We can see that the Uyghur diaspora, many Uyghur organizations' advocacy work focuses on Uyghur human rights, not the independence. And these organizations claim that they represent East Turkestanian people. How could you explain this contradiction?
Okay, this is a very challenging question, but I'm going to be honest. You are absolutely right. Independence of East Turkestan should be decided by the national will of the East Turkestanian people. The organizations in diaspora, basically the Uyghur organizations working for the human rights advocacy or human rights, they represent their organizational goal, not the national aspiration of entire East Turkestanian people, because national aspiration and human rights is different, and national aspiration is actually bigger than the human rights, because that's the historical territorial rights of the entire East Turkestanian people. and the legal rights, and it's about to end the Chinese colonialism. It's not only one Uyghur ethnicity's human rights. So it's totally different. So that's why those organizations' human rights work cannot represent entire East Turkestan population's national aspiration. And as long as these organizations think that their work, the human rights work, only represent their organizational goal, not the entire population, East Turkestanian population's national will, then I don't see any contradiction here.
Are there any questions from the audience? Perfect.
Hello. Why governments were reluctant to support East Turkestan's independence despite it should be the last solution to stop Uyghur genocide?
Okay, yes. States and governments are very cautious when it comes in terms of independence because they were thinking China will not listen. They were thinking that China will not comply to international law and the principles if they put pressure on China for the independence of East Turkestan because China believe that they don't want to give up because China do not want to give up the territory of East Turkestan and all advantages they were getting right now. So it's impossible, they were thinking. That's why they don't want to put pressure about the sovereignty of East Turkestan. And they were thinking maybe we should put pressure on human rights because human rights are universal, China should listen. But unfortunately, the China not listen, but even they put pressure on human rights too. The China is violating many international human rights laws and then they are implementing genocide. So it doesn't matter you put pressure for independence for East Turkestan or human rights, it doesn't matter, they don't listen. So question is here, problem is here, those countries do not want to jeopardize their diplomatic relations with China, but they are not being honest too in the same time, it's because they should know that China is not listening, and that China is the threat to the world, they have to understand. So question is here, the issue is here, it's not about that like, oh, we put pressure about the human rights, they will listen, not because of that. I think question is here, who is China? What kind of country that? We have to understand that. What they gonna do to the world?
If there are no more questions, I would like to, oh, there's one more.
So a lot of other like self-determination movements in the world, like they tend to really capitalize on like international legal or like United Nations related provisions on the rights of like indigenous people specifically, or like the indigenous connection to the land. Is this, indigenous avenue kind of being used for the East Turkestan cause, or like, should it be used? And what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Actually, I was advocating that Uyghurs shouldn't be recognized as an indigenous, even though we are indigenous to the land of East Turkestan. We shouldn't be classified or categorized in UN as an indigenous people, put indigenous people's category, because our cause is very different than indigenous people's cause. They were not nation state in Canada and US before, but even though they experienced similar genocide and oppression like what Uyghurs experiencing right now. This is what we experiencing is similar. What China doing is similar. They copied so many things from the West. That 100 years ago, what Canada did, they copied many things to the Uyghurs right now. But our cause is political cause is very different than them. We were nation state, and China invaded during the decolonization period to East Turkestan Republic with the Stalin's help. They used the army that was prohibited in Article 2.4 in UN Charter. They can't use the military forces, but they used and invaded. So this is very key difference of what's happening to indigenous people and what's happening to us. So our political cause is very different. That's why I don't want to mix similar to indigenous people's issue and Uyghur issue.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I have one question for Mr. Smith. So you mentioned that so it's true that over here in Uyghurs in diaspora we are suffering from Chinese intelligence, blackmailing, or we worried about our families if we do something here, and then our families will suffer, or we sometimes we get blackmailed and then harassed. So you mentioned that we need to organize and do some counterintelligence operations. So my question is that, is there any specific steps to get that? And the second question is, there are still our brothers and sisters who come up here, and then how do we convey this message? How do we encourage them to join us? And if they get harassed or they blackmailed or they have families that are suffering back home, how do we encourage them to speak up? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so let me answer the second part first, which is, what do you do if you're facing this kind of harassment? I created a sample document literally called "What do you do if you're harassed by the Chinese security services?" I can make a copy of it available on the website for SEPNI, so you guys can take a look at it. This will tell you exactly the kinds of things that you can do to turn the tables, to turn the advantage on the Chinese security services. You know, there's a lot of discussion about turning Taiwan into a porcupine, you know, that China won't touch it because it's got too many spikes on it, right? We have to do that for the Uyghur community too. They should feel that every time they try to harass you or harm you or do something to you or your families, that it costs them, that they're going to lose something because of it. We have to impose risk on them for doing that. When they do that, they're breaking the law. They're committing a crime, right? So there are definitely things that can be done there by the people being harassed, and that information is extremely valuable to law enforcement, intelligence communities, and wherever it's happening. And there is definitely a way that we should participate. So I'll make sure that document is publicly available for everyone to see and access. In terms of creating a greater counterintelligence capability, that's something that has to be organized and trained, like any kind of specialized skill, right? So what's really needed, to be very frank, is volunteers. If there are people in the Uyghur community who are committed to defeating the Chinese security services in the way that they oppress the Uyghur community overseas, and to help contribute towards the independence of East Turkestan on that, in that way, then there are people who are willing to help. There are people who are willing to help train you. There are people willing to help to provide resources and things like that. So I would encourage you to, first of all, every expert I've ever talked to said that you should all join your own country's government services. In Canada or any other country that you live in, join the government, join the Canadian Intelligence Services, join Canadian law enforcement, things like that. The diplomatic corps, or become economists or military officers. That's really important. But also, East Turkestan itself needs its own specific organization, and organizations really, and they need professional people trained for that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, please, work with people in your governments locally, or come to people like me or others who are willing to help provide training and support and that kind of thing to help you in any way that we can. It's a skill, right? It's a technical skill. You need technical training.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. You spoke about the interrelationship of diplomacy and intelligence. And do you believe there's been any major progress or setback towards helping Uyghurs? And if you think there is, what have been the most critical factors to it?
I think that there's been a lot of progress in terms of recognition of the Uyghur genocide. There's been a lot of talk today, even in the conference, about the fact, and I even said that people are united in the fact that they support East Turkestan in terms of stopping the genocide. In the United States, my country, we don't agree on anything at all, except East Turkestan, as a matter of fact. It's the only issue that every American agrees is that the genocide in East Turkestan should end. However, that, and as Rukia mentioned, that is not the same as independence. And if the goal is independence, as it must be, not even merely autonomy, right, which is never going to be given by the Chinese government, in fact. If that's to be the case, then there has to be the building up of a very strong diplomatic entity in the diaspora to prepare for that. That's what happened in the other case studies like Ireland and Algeria and places like this, as a matter of fact. So there's a lot of recognition of the Uyghur cause. I think it's the advantage now is to take that recognition and take the next step and build professional or governmental type organizations that can interact with your host countries in the diaspora to cooperate together and to share the things that we hold in common. You know, that, to me, that's the critical step.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay. We will be moving on to Mr. Zelensky. So from organizations like the United Nations or powerful countries like the United States, which of the two do you think is the most effective in trying to get China to take responsibility for their actions against the Uyghurs?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, China has veto authority on the Security Council and the United Nations. So any effective steps that the United Nations wants to take to address the many atrocities and other violations that are replete with communist China, that will be immediately dealt with a veto. So I don't really hold too much hope in the fact that the United Nations, this is just my personal opinion, but I don't think the United Nations will carry that much weight. That's not to say that we shouldn't pursue that avenue, and we should pursue that avenue and identify ways to deal with China's veto authority. But going back to your question, I think that the more realistic strategical option in terms of achieving efficacy is with the United States. But as I mentioned earlier, our challenge is with these greedy corporations that only care about money. They don't care about human atrocities. They don't care about genocide. They don't care even about compromising the future of their kids' freedom. The thing that is just incredulous to me is the fact that you've got wealthy corporations that are incredibly wealthy, and they're willing, because of their greed, to compromise our national security. And what they don't understand is that they're compromising the freedom of future generations. And what's even more incredulous, they're so not only intellectually, ethically lacking that they don't understand that, you know, in the United States, we appreciate the freedom that we got is by people that died fighting for our freedom, dying against, you know, tyranny, Nazi Germany with Hitler, Imperial Japan. So, you know, if those people saw what's going on right now, they'd turn over in their grave. You know, these people, this generation, my generation, we owe it to future generations to do what we can to make sure that we preserve that freedom. And I believe we can. In the beginning, I started off, hey, these are challenges. We got to be realistic about it. But we can do this. We can still do this, but we're going to have to start, you know, we're going to have to start working on this. But one of the challenges is the corporations. And like I said, to me, the most realistic way is to build a grassroots movement. And believe me, we know it's not easy, but you look all throughout history, there's been incredible movements that just started with a few people. So to answer your question, I think it's going to be, the United States will be more effective than the UN.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions for Mr. Zelensky?
How can international organizations such as the International Criminal Court hold leaders of autocratic nations accountable for human rights abuse and violations of international law?
What was the organization you mentioned in the beginning? ICC. Okay. Well, the International Criminal Court has to make a commitment to actually take action against China, and we know what the challenges are. You listen to every speaker that has spoke, including myself, and there are incredible challenges. And I think one of the things we have to do to get the ICC and other entities to try and take some action and have the efficacy to take that action is we've got to educate the public. You know, most people have no clue about the communist China threat. This thing about China's Navy being the largest Navy in the world, how many people were aware of that before I spoke about it today? Anyone? Okay, raise your hand if you were aware of it. Okay. See? So, I mean, in the United States, probably hardly anybody knows about that, and that's part of the job of the movement. As this movement grows, education is a key component, because as people become more educated, then they become more motivated to get involved. And if they understand the actual magnitude of the threat of communist China, and they start thinking about their kids and their kids, you know, then they're going to start taking a second look at this, and then they'll start taking the steps we need people to take, you know, to adequately deal with this threat. Thank you for your question.
I have another question. You have talked about Navy's Chinese countering Chinese technical development by sanctioning chips or AI technologies, but you said it's still not enough to restrict China's expansion, right? But I would like to ask, since so many people are dying in China or in East Turkestan, under China's occupied East Turkestan, even the US, Canada passed a motion in Parliament, they recognized genocide. I wish there's one of the MP from Liberal government sitting here from Canada, so I can ask them what kind of concrete action they can take to actually stop that. Because all those sanctions or any kind of countermeasures against China is not working until now. So you mentioned lots of things you can do, but even the US, what's in their ammunition they can use against China to stop it as fast as possible, because millions of people are dying, because the strategies you are mentioning, it will, for example, increasing the budget for Navy, it will take a long process to pass through Senate, Congress, right? But people are dying. Genocide is happening. US recognized that. All the alliance, Canada and Europe, lots of countries already recognize that, but there's not very effective concrete actions have been taken. So what US can do to immediate or not immediate stop it as fast as possible?
I think that the actions that the United States took in the past to try and address concerns related to China, it was basically window dressing. It was feel-good measures to make it look like they're attempting to do something. But they're being dumb like a fox. They want to make it look like they're trying to do something, when in reality, they don't want to do something, because again, they're controlled by the big corporations. But they have to look when they run for election. Oh, we got to bring back the jobs. I was at somebody's party who's running for U.S. Senate in Florida. And I'm asking them about China and these issues, and they say, oh yeah, we got to bring back the jobs, we got to do. I say, everybody says that, and then they go in and nobody does anything, you know? I think, realistically, I think until we get a movement started, as difficult as it may be, that's our greatest chance to make. I could sit here and tell you, you know, some wonderful things, sounds good, but it's not going to work. I'm just telling you right now. We know that the corporations control everything. Look what they did. Our government made a big deal. They didn't know that they're going to be lobbied by big business. So the president, everybody's going on TV, we got to ban these advanced computer chips. This is our national security at stake. The ban was supposed to go into effect in October. All of a sudden, the lobbying came through. It died. You know when they're going to implement the ban to save face? 5 years from now. So the ban was going to be in place in October. Now they're talking 5 years. 5 years, China will probably make their own, advanced computer chips. So, I'm serious when I'm talking about trying to start a movement. We got to get a movement started in Canada. We got to get a movement started in the United States, even if it's small. Because I'll tell you, realistically, these corporations are not going to have a conscience. These corporations are driven by pure greed. And they don't give a hoot about freedom for future generations, genocide that's taking place right now. Horrible atrocities like genocide. They don't care. All they care about is get more and more money. So I recommend you start organizing, and I'll work with your group, and we work with other groups, and we can make it happen. It's going to be difficult, but it can be done. That's our only real hope right now, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Zelensky. You made some excellent points about corporations. Let us move on to our last speaker, Professor Fiskesho.
Our cameraman's not happy.
Oh, I also had a question too, but I guess.
Oh, towards who?
Zelensky.
Oh, okay. All right, let's take one more question for Mr. Zelensky.
Okay, real quick. What exactly do countries care about with regards to self-determination or independence movement of East Turkestan, outcome of the struggle or means used to obtain?
I'll tell you right now, the biggest challenge we have is making people aware of the struggle. I bet you if you ask the average American where East Turkestan is, they're not even going to know. Most people probably don't even know about the genocide that's taking place. And then the second hurdle, after educating them, is apathy. People just don't, care. There's not enough people that really follow politics. I can't speak for Canada, obviously, but in the United States, my personal experience is the apathy is just incredible. And so that's one of the benefits of getting a movement started. If you can educate the public about what's taking place in the world and how it impacts them. If these people understand what it means for future generations, that they're going to get more involved. But you're right. Throughout different periods of our history, we've tried to promote self-determination, but I think the ball is in our court. We've got to educate them because our government isn't going to move on its own. I got to say one thing to congratulate the speaker from Parliament here earlier. To meet a politician that actually understands the issue, the importance of this issue, and show up, that's incredibly rare. I was in politics for 32 years, and trying to get politicians to even understand the magnitude of the threat, let alone show up and try and introduce legislation. This guy deserves, this gentleman, who's no longer here, I'm pointing at his empty chair. But we need to congratulate him, because if we had more people like him in Parliament and in the United States Congress, we wouldn't be in this position right now. They would be taking action. I know this gentleman, he would be taking action, and we wouldn't be in this mess. So I hope to connect up with him and thank him in person.
There you go.
Thank you again, Mr. Zelensky, and yes, we are very grateful to have Mr. Jennis here with us today. Moving on to Professor Fiskesho. How can democratic nations work together to counter disinformation and propaganda from China that seeks to undermine democratic institutions' effort to stop genocide?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that some of this work is already happening. The European Union, of which I am a citizen, has a special agency that identifies disinformation and issues bulletins against it. And they have been focused a lot on Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But they also have a broader mission, and it also does include the Chinese disinformation. So I think that is a good beginning. I think it has to be a concerted effort by people like us, to write to the newspapers, write articles, write opinion pieces, and also for encourage news media to pay attention and not forget. And also, as we have been talking about already, encourage to show that we care ourselves, we encourage our elected representatives to do more of this, such as this example in the European Union.
Thank you so much.
I have a couple of small points I'd like to make, but did you have another question?
Are there any questions for the President? Oh, there is. Would you like to add it after the questions? Is that okay?
Yeah. My question is, what small points do you have to make?
Can we get a microphone?
I have one for you.
Oh, you have questions for each other?
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you so much. So, we all know that Xi Jinping recently just met with US President Biden, and the results of their communication looked really good. And Xi Jinping went to Japan after concluding his trip to the United States. So, my question is, if Xi Jinping continues to improve his foreign policy and indeed makes better progress in diplomatic relations with the United States or any other country, does that mean that we, the Uyghurs, will be in a weaker position? Will the strength of China mean that we will have fewer supporters and we will have more difficulties on the road to independence and less chance to protect our freedom? Thank you.
Well, I think this is a difficult question. Again, it comes back to us as scholars, as activists, as opinion makers. We can try to keep the pressure up. Just before the Biden-Xi meeting, there was a joint letter sent to Biden by 59 different human rights organizations, including some speaking for the Uyghurs also, demanding that Biden not forget, but include on his agenda the Uyghur issue, the East Turkestan issue. And according to the United States, and according to the White House readout, the press release from the White House, he did bring it up. It said that Biden did bring up the human rights situation of the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and Hong Kong, and also talked about Taiwan. Of course, we cannot know exactly what went on. I suspect, but that's my private speculation, that political leaders like the American president and also those in other countries like Japan, Prime Minister Kishida, when they think about how to approach this, they feel compelled to prioritize different issues. So that's why the Americans care about the fentanyl, and they bring that up, and that's going to be at the expense of other issues that they could have brought up. And I'm conflicted about that. I feel personally that they should just slam the door and say no more talking until this genocide stops. That would be my personal feeling. But they are not going to do that. The American president and these others, they're going to juggle a whole range of issues, like from Japan, would you please start importing Japanese ocean fisheries products again, and so on and so forth. It's a game they play. I think the only answer is that we have to keep the burden comes back to us, to keep the pressure on, to keep raising the issues, and compelled them to raise this. And I feel it's very important right now, because it seems when you saw the reporting from news media around the Xi-Biden meeting, although Biden's administration said we did bring up the human rights situation of the Uyghurs, none of the many of the news media asked him about it. None of them asked anything in any press conference about it. I think that is really garbage, and I think that we should be trying to make to demand that the news organizations pay attention. At one point, I think it was on the American NPR, instead of talking about the Uyghur issue, in the minute they had left, instead they talked about whether there would be pandas coming back to the American zoo. And I care less about the pandas in the zoo than about this issue that we are talking about here. So I guess I sound like a broken record, but it comes back to our agitating and reminding people to put this issue back on the map.
Thank you, Professor.
And so I had a couple of small disagreements. I think there is agreement with some of my colleagues here. One is about the companies. I think that it's not, the picture is not, many companies, yes, are dominated by greed and they care nothing about all the rest. However, the picture is also slightly more complicated, and there may be openings for our activism. For example, in the fashion and clothing and textiles arena, we have seen companies, I believe like H&M and others, who have felt that as part of the recent trend of the last few decades of companies also declaring themselves socially responsible and not making the world a worse place but a better place. So they look at their own practices in sourcing and producing their products, and they invite outside scrutiny to this. And some of them actually withdrawn sourcing like cotton from Xinjiang so that they can no longer be accused of complicity in the genocide. And of course, you could argue that ultimately it's still about greed, because what they think is that if they can be accused of complicity in the genocide, then in slave labor, then they will lose money over that, because people will not buy their stuff. Right? Something that could happen to Uniqlo and others who have said we don't care. But for the companies that care, I think we should applaud them, and we should demand that others do the same. I think there is an opening for pressuring companies to do the right thing, and we could argue that let's do this together. I know there's a whole so that's for companies. I think there's some openings. And the other thing is history. We heard about the imperial tradition, and I just want to add 2 footnotes to that. I think that there is a little bit more to the Chinese tradition than only emperors and emperors after emperors. For example, there was a period, we now know it as the Warring States, but there is a Hong Kong scholar, Victoria Tin Borhui. She has a whole book called War and State Formation in Ancient China and Early Modern Europe. She makes an argument that the Warring States was an international system of independent states interacting through diplomacy more than war. She argues that this label of warring states is a mislabeling, a tendentious mislabeling made by the Qin and the Han empires that came later, and that wanted to present the empire as the only way of ruling China, when in effect they just had 400 years of an international community. And of course, if the issue of East Turkestan was placed in such a context of the Chinese states living as a community of states, then this would not even be an issue, because of course it could be just another country, part of a mosaic of countries in East Asia. Well, that was a long time ago, but I think it's worthwhile to include it in the picture so that we don't make the Chinese tradition, political tradition, out to be too monolithic. They have actually, you mentioned the Taoists, and that's another exception. But there is also this period of the so-called warring states that should be called something else. They should be called the International Community of Chinese States or something like that. The other thing that I always like to remind people of is that the Chinese Communist Party used to declare it's against imperialism, and it was especially against the Chinese empires. And in the 1930s, the Chinese Communist Party made a solemn promise that after we get to power, all of you guys, Tibetans, Uyghurs, you can all have your own country, you can have your independent country, and separate from the Soviet Union of China, which is what they were going to set up. And they actually said that, they printed that in the party constitution that this was going to happen. Of course, in 1949, they backtracked, they abandoned this promise. But I think we should be reminding them of this promise that, hello, you Chinese communists used to be against the empire. Do you remember?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'd just like to add one more comment on the concept of a movement. You know, the issue keeps arising. How do we make people aware? How do we get our governments involved to do something? Well, if you get involved with the movement, you'll be able to identify natural allies. If you look at people on the far left of the political spectrum, they're very, very sensitive to human rights atrocities and violations. And if they had an organization that they could work with, you got natural allies. Then you look on the far right of the political spectrum, the hawks against China. They're going to embrace the movement as well because they see what we all see, what a threat communist China is. So you're going to be able to mobilize this support, and once you get this mobilization, once you get this mobilized support, you could start doing things that you can't do right now because you're not big enough yet. But you could start mobilizing support to reach out to influencers and bloggers. A lot of them don't have a clue. You bring this issue to their attention, they're going to start writing about it. More people are going to become aware of it. And then you look, without getting involved, I don't even want to open up the discussion of Israel and Palestine right now, but what are both sides doing? They got massive demonstrations. You increase in numbers, then you start having demonstrations. All these movements all throughout history that want to bring attention to their cause, they get involved in these demonstrations to great effect. And by just doing these things right now to establish the foundation for the movement, you're going to pick up momentum, you're going to pick up speed. Once you're on TV, you get these demonstrations, you're going to identify other people that weren't aware of it, and you'll get stronger. It's like a snowball going down a hill. It'll go quicker and get stronger and get stronger.
We have one more question.
I want to ask Ms. Robier. So I would like to ask, I come to Canada just found that many young people are still afraid of CCP and are not brave enough to come out and fight for our freedom to East Turkestan. So what do you think of these young people? How can we end these young people to our team to fight for our East Turkestan, our country, our freedom? Thank you.
Yes, but this is a very difficult question too, and I am challenging with this issue since a long time. Students before you, international students, they're afraid of the China's harassment, and they don't want to show up. They don't want to come to the community. They don't want to work with us, and they don't want to do anything for the freedom of East Turkestan. But they should understand that this is not the solution, right? If they go hiding like that, we can't go nowhere. So, what is the solution? If you want to end everything, want to get solution, you have to do something. Hiding doesn't solve the problem. But it's very difficult for us to explain those students and educate them, since they don't come to the conferences to educate themselves like you. So I appreciate you came and your bravery. Thank you. And everyone has to be like you. I wish, And but many students, they are afraid, they don't want to come. Even I approach one by one, they don't want to talk over the phone with me. They said, sister, can we meet, talk in person? But I don't want to say anything over the phone. They like that, and it is, I understand their frustration too, because China is pressure them in one by one. But like I say, we have to pass through from this fear, because China playing with us. They think if I do that, they can't do anything. So we don't do anything. So China's intention is genocide, want to destroy this, the Uyghurs and other nations in the East Turkestan, so they can have no headache, right, in the future. So they think like that. So that's their intention. And if we thinking this, we have to be eye to eye with China. Somebody has to blink. China has to blink, or we have to blink. Now those students hiding, that means we blink our eyes, so we're losing. Right? China gonna succeed to control East Turkestan and killing all of the Uyghurs. So it is important to educate them, and it's my challenge too. It's very difficult. It's not easy to come over this fair, because China is playing one by one, putting pressure to everyone's parents and relatives. It's not easy for them, but they can find a way. They don't have to show up openly. They can do many things in secretly. You don't have to show your face. You can wear mask when you're going to the protest, or you can participate in many activities online without giving your name, and social media. You can do many things, but these people has to be educated, and I need you guys to educate them. When you guys are young, easy for you to approach other young people, right? Thank you.
We will take one last question. There's a gentleman at the back.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. Many Western countries tend to easily being optimistic about China will change its course, and they change its own course about China. For example, May 2020, the U.S. State Department of Commerce sanction was about alleged participating human rights violation against Uyghur and other Turkic people in East Turkestan. And the Biden administration agreed to lift the sanction recently. Question one to Mr. Zelensky. How this kind of decision or agreement might hurt the U.S. interest in the long run? And second question to Mr. Charles Burton. What might be the underlying reason to misunderstand how China behaves? Thank you.
Can you repeat your first question?
What might be the underlying reason to misunderstand how China behaves?
Why do people misunderstand what China intends?
Okay. Yeah, because I'll tell you, for the same reason that people misunderstood Adolf Hitler prior to the Second World War. Adolf Hitler wrote in the Mein Kampf all the atrocities he was going to do. But when he met with the business people, the political leaders, he talked really nice to them. And for some reason, I don't know what it is about human nature, they can meet the most evil people, they could read all the terrible things they say, but if they smile at them and they're nice and they say nice things, they believe them. I fail to understand that. Obviously, there's some greed involved with that. There's some sort of financial, interest that usually goes along with that. So I think that basically the short answer, I think greed overshadows their vision of what's really going on in the world, either deliberately or subconsciously. I would say probably deliberately.
This kind of question, it's a lot of complicated countervailing movements. I mean, Rukia is encouraging the students of Uyghur origin to support the cause and support independence and raise awareness of genocide. But a lot of the young children of Uyghur origin become Canadian citizens and become focused on Canadian matters and want to leave the situations in the land of their forefathers behind. My own ancestors came to Canada as Orangemen, you know, with a struggle between the Protestants and the Catholics, and you know, we didn't continue to fight for that. I think the other aspect is, I think for a lot of people, you know, the notion of sovereignty is who has effective control of the territory, and the fact is that China is in effective control of Xinjiang, and so a lot of people would defer to that reality that China's in charge and therefore they get to decide what goes on there. Certainly the violation of international human rights is very glaring, but you know, another discourse that China uses is that if we criticize China, then we're criticizing their distinctive culture and are engaging in white supremacist racism against Asian peoples. And that kind of discourse does have enormous resonance in Canada. So as soon as you say the racism word, people back away. So it is hard. I mean, we are facing a struggle to try and get people to appreciate the values that inform Canada, which are justice, human rights, and the cultural diversity as a key value, that people should be able to choose to be what they are, what religion they believe in, what culture they follow. And we do have some politicians like Garnet Jennis who, you know, are very much committed to this sort of discourse, but it's still a minority. You know, it is hard. And you know, I hear Magnus talking about corporations and so on, but the Chinese money is enormously influential. There's no question about this, and it's hard for us who don't have those resources to give the incentives for people to follow the other way, just a moral suasion argument to always triumph.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience for any of the speakers? Okay, then there's one question.
Well, people doesn't want to let you go easily, so here it is, thanks. Hello, gentlemen, Ms. Joaquin. So it was a great discussion been happening, and I'm really proud of all of you guys. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Itibar, by the way. I was asked by someone who's having a lack of English to translate this question, especially for Mr. Smith. The question is, during the former President Trump administration, Trump has put around the embargo on all the Chinese-made products. However, the trade between China and the U.S. gone up from $8 to $700 million, billion dollars, for example. And why is that? Like, they're putting the embargo first, and then the money, the trade, the number goes up. This is the one question from the person, especially from Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you for the question. There's a lot of reasons that have to do with just mere regular economics. I want to say this specifically, though, in relationship to the economic strategy against China. And in particular in relationship to East Turkestan, which is, for instance, if you're getting companies to have an embargo or to not participate in supply chains because they're concerned about the genocide in East Turkestan, this is not enough. This is not good enough, because if you ask the same companies, well, are you going to stop buying from the supply chain when East Turkestan wants to be free, when they want to be an independent country? You're going to hear dead silence on this issue, because that's a completely different issue for them. So, as I said before, you are victims of the genocide, but you are not only that, you are also a sovereign nation. You were in the past and you will be again. What that means is you have to have pains me to say this, but you need more than one nation as your ally. You can't rely on embargoes created by the United States or Canada or Japan or Australia or any of them. You should have good diplomatic relations with all of them. You should have something to offer to all of them in terms of weight and power that makes them want to bargain with you on your behalf so that you can cooperate together. But you cannot rely on any one nation to serve your interest as a sovereign nation. The United States doesn't do that. Canada doesn't do that. They all have different agendas. So I would say that even though sometimes the United States deals in policies that affect China for the sake of the United States, or sometimes might for humanitarian reasons do something to benefit the Uyghur people, you need to have good allies, good strong allies around the world, and have something to offer them and cooperate with them, realizing that you will all have unique interests, and that as an independent nation, you will still be living in the same neighborhood. You'll still have China as a neighbor and Russia as a neighbor, and you're going to have to build something to deal with that, right? This generation here that I'm seeing in front of me, that's your job. That's your job, to build those institutions, and you can do it.
I believe we have another question.
I have a question for Mr. Zelensky. My question is, how can a regular citizen from an international community can take more of a unified and effective approach when it comes to holding their government's response towards the response to this genocide?
Okay, great question. And this will be the last time I mention the movement issue for the meeting, because right now you're going to go home tonight, you're going to be hearing movement. So this will be the last time. There's strength in numbers. And if you get a movement, right now, if you call a minister of parliament from one person, you're lucky if you can get a staff person to call you back. But if you call up from an organization, say I'm calling up from the Center for East Turkistan National Interest Organization, and we have 50,000 members, that person is going to get back to you. The larger your group, the larger your organization, the more they're going to get back to you. But, they're driven. Again, people are driven by self-interest. One person isn't going to do anything for them, to harm them, or to help them. So you're not going to hardly get any attention. And like I said earlier, there are people on the left of the political spectrum that are very sensitive to causes like this, and they will get out. If they're made aware of the issue, they'll get out and they'll get involved. But a lot of them don't even know what's going on. We keep talking about this genocide that's taking place. It's as terrible as it may be. Most people don't know about it. So how are you going to enlist the support that are your natural allies that will help you if they're not aware of it? And the same thing on the right. There's people out there, and there's some politicians. Not all politicians are bad, just like not all corporations are bad. But unfortunately, most of them are. That's what we're dealing with. But there's politicians on the hard right of the political spectrum that would be your natural allies, politicians on the far left, and there's citizens in Canada, the United States, and wherever. You need to mobilize their support. So when you call up and you want your elected official to do something for you, or to fight fight against the genocide that's taking place in East Turkestan, they'll listen. This is just my opinion from a strategical perspective. First, you fight for the ending of the genocide against the Uyghur population. And then once we achieve that, then you work towards the independence. You go for the easier stuff first, because who's going to say, I'm in support of genocide of the Uyghur population? There's no one you're going to find that's going to say that. Everybody's going to have a soft spot in their heart for that. You get the momentum going in that direction. You get people to support you first. Ideally, we're successful at some point in the future. And then, the big picture, you plan many years ahead, the big picture then is to get the freedom for an independence for East Turkestan. It all starts with you. There's just a couple quotes I want to give you to help reinforce this whole idea about the movement. Everybody here heard of Henry Ford? the guy who started Ford Motor Company, hero. He's one of my heroes with respect to paying his workers good wages. All these other big corporation business executives want to get away with paying their workers as little as possible. You know what he said? He said, I want to pay my workers enough money so they can buy my car. That's a smart man. When he was alive, Ford was on top of the world. When he got older and somebody else took over, then they weren't as big. Anyway, Henry Ford went on to say, whether you think you can do something or whether you think you can do something, you're right. Just think about that. He's saying whether you think you can do something or whether you think you can't do something, you're right. So if you think you can do something, you're right, you can do it. If you think you can't do something, you're right, you can't do it. But you look at all these great people in history. I love studying biographies of great people in history. They all went against incredible odds because they thought that they can do it. Robert Kennedy, one last quote. Robert Kennedy said, "One person can make a difference, and everybody should try." I mean, these are brilliant minds that know the things you can do if you set your mind to it. And of course, I will be happy to help you. I feel terrible about the genocide that's going on in East Turkistan, and we have to do everything we can in our power to help end that genocide. And then after that, we're going to get the independence. Okay.
I want to add something quickly to Mr. Zelensky's points. And he said that we have to step by step, and we have to work on to the genocide. Once we stop the genocide, then we're going to work on to the independence. I totally agree with that. Genocide, of course, part of that work, of that national aspiration of independence and our goal. So, of course, there is a process. We have to go by step, but our work has to fit that national aspiration. Whatever we're doing does not match or inconsistent with our national aspiration, then there is a contradiction and it doesn't work. So, for example, each language we use, whatever we do, it has to match our national aspiration. If not, we're going to go into the wrong way. But there's, of course, I totally agree, we should have a process. That's not we just, okay, we want independence. We cannot get independence in one shot or just it's going to be fantasy and the slogan. So we have to have process and the work. But that work must fit to that national aspiration. I want to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of the speakers and all of the audience members who have asked questions. I would like to conclude the panel and extend my deepest gratitude. And I believe we would like to take a moment to also do that as well. Perfect, thank you.